talking about in Oakland, some of the wonderful people that came to participate in the event were, saying what a lot of you say all the time today that, oh, we don't have any ally, nobody cares about our people. And so we just started giving them all of the examples that we know that we experience because we're out here doing the work. And so when you're out here doing the work, you encounter people from various communities who are also doing the work. And so you know better. If you're in your house looking at social media or even if you're reading in your house and you're not participating in anything, then you're only going to know what you see in your house. So that's important to understand. And Friday night was an example of that because here in Sacramento, we had a number of groups who were meeting and we're talking about doing some work together, which we're going to do. Very good work. And there are a couple of really wonderful indigenous Latino groups in this meeting, and they kept looking at us, those of us who are African in the room, and they were like, we're so happy that you're here. We need to do work to build unity among our communities. They're turning our communities against each other, on and on. And all I was saying to them is like, hey, you're preaching to the choir. You don't have to convince me. That's why we're here. Like we absolutely see the necessity to do that. But again, if you're not out doing the work, you would never have an experience like that. So you would think, oh, indigenous people, they don't care anything about us, when I have more examples to illustrate how they have come to us like they did Friday night here, then you have time to hear. So we give honor and respect to their struggle. And it's like I told someone at that meeting Friday night, we would support your struggle as Indigenous people, even if you didn't support ours, because the more victory you can accumulate against this enemy, this empire, that helps our struggle to liberate Africa. Objectively, that's true. So only a fool would not understand that from a scientific standpoint. So that's what we are. Revolution is scientific. It's not sentimental. It's not based on your individual anecdotal experiences. It's based on study of scientific phenomenon. It's based on historical and dialectical materialism. So that's how we operate. So we give honor and respect to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And of course, we give honor and respect to our African ancestors. They are, without question, an inspiration. If you don't find inspiration in what they've done up to this point, then you should probably go get some sort of medical examination to see what's disconnected or what's missing. Our ancestors have given us every reason to be optimistic about our future and to continue to do everything we can to make sure that future is what our future generations deserve it to be. So we always give honor to our African ancestors. We would never not acknowledge that. And we say African because that's exactly what they were. That's exactly what we are. Someone told me years ago when I changed my name back in the mid 1980s, they told me, well, you're disrespecting your ancestors. I'm like, no, I'm honoring my ancestors. I understand our history. Our ancestors fought for dignity, and dignity is us reclaiming our actual cultural, historical, and political definition of who we are. And that's connected to Africa. There's no separation. That you can put whatever fantasy you want on it. You can put whatever nonsense you want on it. It doesn't do anything to change. Or as Kwame Ture said years ago, if you fry your hair when Mother Nature starts to rain, your hair goes right back to Africa. And that's with everything else, not just hair. That's with everything else. No matter what you do, it goes back to Africa. The things that we say, the physiological elements within our bodies, our cultural practices, everything goes to Africa, not even back to Africa, forward to Africa. Everything. I watched a film the other day about women in Venezuela and how they go in the rivers and they pat the water and they make musical sounds because depending upon how you pat it and where you pat it, it makes different sounds. And so they make song doing that. And come to find out, the people who research that entire practice comes from Angola. This is everything with us. It doesn't change that fact just because we don't know about it. That just means we don't know. It doesn't mean it's not true. But we can correct that. That's corrected. We have to do the work. So we'll go ahead and get started by, again, informing you who we are in case you don't know that. Our Ancestors Voices is a weekly program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the AAPRP. And the AAPRP is a revolutionary, meaning we want uncompromising change. We're not trying to vote our way out of our condition. We're not trying to purchase our condition. We know none of those things are possible. We're trying to seize power for the masses of African people. So we're a revolutionary, independent, mass, Pan-African political party that is based in Africa. We're not based in California. We're not based in New York. We're not based in Jamaica. We're not based in Haiti. Although we have people in the party in all those places, we are based in the national home of African people everywhere we are on the planet Earth, which is Africa. It's the only land base we have any legitimate moral right to. We don't have any land, no matter what kind of stories we make up, we don't have any moral right to these lands here in the Western Hemisphere. And the people who claim that we do, the African people we claim that we do, we know what that, I mean, that just is a thing while Africa is poor, scattered, and suffering. The minute that Africa regains its dignity and is on top of the world, and everybody is saying that, all of the research is pointing in that direction. Everything coming out of the United Nations, everything coming out of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, these entities are our enemies, but they're all saying that. And everything coming out of US intel and Zionist Israeli intel, all of this is saying that Africa is on the rise. The only people that do not know that are scattered and confused Africans within the US. Everybody else in the world is clear about that. And so Africa is on the rise, and when she is on top, meaning that she's free, independent, and socialist, which is the definition of Pan-Africanism, which is the work that we're doing, then all these people who want to deny Africa, they'll be pushing us out of line to be African. I know this. I'll bet you everything I own that this is going to be the case. Because the reason why I know this is because all these different movements are not rooted in anything foundational. It's just rooted in this is the flavor of the week. So now we're saying this. There's no evidence being produced, nothing. Like someone was arguing with me the other day about, well, there were no slave ships. I'm like, all you got to do is go to our enemies. All the banks who made their wealth financing slave ships, they have the records. I know because I've researched that. All the insurance companies who got their wealth from insuring those slave ships and plantations, they have the records. I know because I've researched it. You don't know because you haven't. You looked at YouTube videos while some of us were doing serious research. So this is where we have to go, you all. This is what we need to do. We're not playing games. We're not grifting. We're not doing something today that we hope can put some money in our pocket. We're here fighting for the forward progress of the masses of our people. And you should join us. So the AAPRP's work is again to achieve Pan-Africanism, one united socialist Africa. And our Ancestors Voices is one of many programs we do online and in person. I just mentioned we did one in person yesterday, online and in person. And this particular program is hosted each week by myself, Ajamu, and my daughter, Dr. Shakura, who is she is my biological and ideological daughter. So to get us started on this topic today, Malcolm X's unknown relationship to SNCC, I will turn it over to Shakura.
Thank you. Appreciate you, Baba Jamu. Greetings, everyone. What's going on? Thank you so much for being here with us today. We are very excited to maybe enhance your information or maybe to give you a brand new perspective that you hadn't already considered or connected as it relates to us talking about two very profound critical moments in African history, her history, their history, that has literally shaped how Baba Ajamu and I are sitting in front of you here today. It has shaped the party's ideological development. It has also shaped how we have come to understand more and more about the progression that Malcolm X was starting to face, especially after he went home the second and first time, and how he was starting to think differently about what that looks like. And so I think that it's important for us to highlight that. And I do want to, make note to several things that I want to talk about today. So, first, we can start with thinking about how there could be an event that could be entitled something like, quote unquote, the unknown relationship, right, and connection to the African experience. Everywhere on earth, though, the ruling class would be able to write and determine what that event could look like. And so we're trying to not only mystify that and deconstruct that, but we're trying to control the narrative based on evidence, based on truth, based on justice, and based on just simply what we know about the progression moving up to that point. We know that Malcolm was starting to develop more of a Pan Africanist lens. I would love to talk to him now, had he still been alive, and just get his perspective on some of these concepts that are now up and coming, such as Islamophobia or homophobia. Love to get his thoughts on ableism, patriarchy. We weren't able to hear from him in that regard because he was taken too soon, but I would like to imagine that he was continuing to move on that path and he was continuing to become more aware of all of those contradictions. And I'm sure he would have had something to say about them. Because ultimately his position was, we need to get rid of any systemic oppression that is harming African people. And I argue that those very much do that. So, thinking about that, we can even highlight, if the lion, right, will never tell the history of the hunt from the perspectives of those the lion preys upon, right? I also was thinking about Zora Neale Hurston. She has a quote that says, when they violate you, if you say nothing, they will tell people that you enjoyed it, right? So, this idea of how we can only tell the stories from the position that we are in. It would never be our responsibility to tell the story from the oppressor's position. And in Zora Neale Hurston's case, it's not going to be our job to let the oppressor tell the story for us, right? Like, we still have that responsibility to do that. We still have the agency, hopefully, to do that. And if we don't have the agency, then what does that conversation look like in terms of us getting that agency back? Those are questions that I think we need to keep thinking about. It's our responsibility to spread our story, to tell our story to our youth, to our future generations, to our families, to our friends, to our partners, to coworkers, to have these conversations, even if it means being uncomfortable. Like, this is what that looks like, right? These are the things that we have to kind of navigate. We need to make sure that our youth know. We need to make sure of that. That's our responsibility. We can't rely on the capitalist imperialist education system to do our job for us. That is not their job. Their job in public education and private Montessori and Montessori, I can't even think of the other school now. It's all has been a blur to me since I'm not in that world anymore. But all these special schools that are not public schools, but they're private, public, all this stuff, like these alternative schools, you all know what I'm talking about. Like, all of these kind of schools, that's not their job. To tell our story? No, that's not their job. Their job is to perpetuate and to promote the capitalist system. That's their job. Their job is to train and to teach our students, our children, what it means to be pawns under capitalism, to teach them at very young ages that they should not be missing school, because missing school is equivalent to missing work. And if you're missing work, then the capitalist system can't make the profit, because it can't make the product to make the profit, because you're not there to help push the product along, right? So, like, it's crazy that we're teaching a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old that they should not take care of themselves, but we are in fact doing that. And if you're in an organization that's working for justice, hopefully you're resisting and fighting against that. So I shouldn't say we, but the system is definitely teaching them that. Definitely teaching them that. And so we have that responsibility not only to shake that up and to agitate that, but to challenge it. What does it mean for us to tell our story? And in part of that, us working on deconstructing the capitalist system and the imagery and the ideological struggle that has already been waged on our children, right? What does that look like? We have to understand that, our youth need to know that we have always fought with dignity and respect for our legacy. That is our responsibility to teach them that. If you're in a position where you can see the slide, then you see this really profound picture of Malcolm, and the caption says, Malcolm said that, quote, history is the best weapon for the oppressed, end quote. Right. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, I'm sure Baba Ajamu will talk in great detail more about this. But I just want to highlight that it's really cool that we're giving this topic connecting how Malcolm had this relationship with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, because we could also think about how one of my favorite pieces that is listed in the party now was actually influenced by Ethel Minor, who, as you all know, was a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And actually, in 1967, Ethel Minor took a position that was anti-Zionist and wrote a piece that was published in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating newsletter. And I'm sharing that with you all because it was very rare for anyone, especially Africans, to take such a position where it was very much pro-Palestine and free Palestine at that time. And then to make matters even more efficient and more calm and cool, then she was in a position where her piece actually influenced a piece that we still have on our reading list today. So when you join the work study circle with the All African People's Revolutionary Party, we have kind of updated, I guess, the piece that she originally wrote, and it's still listed as a pamphlet. And I think that it was just really cool back then that she literally wrote that piece because she was trying to educate Africans about what was happening in Palestine and trying to give them a different narrative that she knew they didn't have access to. And I would argue we are in the same position to do that today. And of course, as we know, Malcolm would have been on board with that. So just trying to bring all of this together, also making the point to support what Babu Ajamu said earlier. A lot of our people, we don't think that other folks have shown up for us and stood up for us. And we also don't know the background story of it. We don't know the history, the herstory, and the their story. And we don't know examples of how they have literally done what they're doing. So then we can't understand why we would be in solidarity with them. But we are here to tell you today, and we've told you before, and we will tell you again, we want to make sure that anybody who is oppressed is in a position where they can get their land back, because that's usually a big factor, common denominator with that, get control of their land, and to be able to assert themselves in a way, maybe by force or maybe, through ideological struggle, so that they can get control of their resources and have some respect come towards them because they're not in a position where they can be colonized. They're not in a position where they can be bullied. Right. And so, just to say, if you are an African right now and you still don't understand why we are pro Palestine and why we are talking about free Palestine, I would just argue to you, I will never forget, seeing that post in 2020 or maybe 2021. It was definitely during the COVID-19 pandemic, where the Palestinians, who unfortunately had had mass experience with dealing with tear gas, were posting and sending messages to BLM members in the diaspora, you all, telling us how to navigate, how to deal with tear gas, what ingredients we needed to get to deal with it if we got it in our eyes, if we came up our nostrils, how we could navigate that. They didn't have to post those messages. They didn't have to send those messages to us. They didn't even have to know what was going on in the America, because they had their literal own war that they have been fighting since 1948. They have their own war that they've been fighting. But just like Palestinians understand that the struggle for Africa is contingent on Palestinians being free, we in the All African People's Revolutionary Party understand that the struggle for Palestine is contingent on us getting our land back and being free. Case in point, the diamonds that are stolen from our home in Africa are taken to Israel and cleaned there so that they can be shipped out to De Beers and Jared and all these other diamond companies that we all know and we see the commercials for during the holiday season and during Mother's Day weekend and all this other nonsense. I don't have to tell you that cleaning diamonds has some very serious chemical effects in the ether and in the atmosphere. So we have to already be thinking about, if you're like me and you're a health person, you're already thinking about the respiratory consequences, not to mention the inhalation of the smoke and the bombing and the constant fear that you are under attack and you might not make it back to your house to see your family that day. And then for African people, it's our diamonds. How come we don't get to control how they're being sold and profited? Do we see any of that money? Not to mention the fact that we are also developing black lung from mining for those diamonds, and we don't even get half of the income that we deserve to make from that. So, yes, we want Palestine to be free because they will have no reason to be cleaning our diamonds. And Palestine wants Africa to be free because we don't need to be polluting to their air and atmosphere, because we're in a position where we understand they deserve to have a literal better quality of air, but also quality of life. And that's just one example. We could give several examples for indigenous people, for Asian descent people, for queer people, why we need to organize non-male people, different able, like we could give plenty of examples, you all. We don't have time. That's why we have thousands of other seminars that are already recorded and you can watch them. Next slide, please. So I just think that's important to note. And I want to wrap this next slide up before I pass it back to Baba Ajamu. So we can also think about how, the human progress, right? It doesn't stand still. That's the thing, is like, we are in this and we're fighting this. We're waging this war against imperialism, against capitalism, against systems, against people who are not aware that these are systems. And therefore, we have to try to educate them while we still try to resist those systems, right? But, excuse me, the human progress, it's not at a standstill. It's constantly moving. It is constantly moving. Even if you decide that you need to take a break and you can't necessarily resist in that moment, it is constantly moving because it's bigger than you. It's bigger than you. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than both of us together. Right. And so everything is on a continuum. Our historic civilizations, we can think about like the rebellions of the Labodi, the Wolof, the Mandika, the Akan, the Fulani, the Kakongo, yeah, etc. Right? Those fed into Marcus Garvey's development of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, right? That fed into him understanding and talking to the other comrades with the UNIA and coming up with the concept of our flag, our red, black, and green flag. And I will always thank the UNIA for creating a symbol that we all could hold dear to our heart, because we all understand that he wanted the organization, not just him, the organization wanted our people to have a symbol that represented our struggle. And therefore, each of those colors are very significant and what they represent. The red, of course, representing our blood, because we never forget the sacrifices of our ancestors. We also think about our blood in terms of us coming together and being unified and living in a better world where we're not experiencing the type of mistreatment and abuse that we are currently experiencing, right? The green to represent our land, our agriculture, right? Us being able to get back to our crops, being able to grow the produce that we want to grow so that we can have a more healthier way of navigating this world instead of having to just deal with the fact that we live in food insecure neighborhoods, or what research now is saying are food apartheid neighborhoods. Because being food insecure is not a normal thing. That is very much a violation of human rights, right? And then last but not least, right, we have the red, we have the green, and then we have the black to represent our spirit and our souls, to represent that we have been struggling for more than 400 years and we are still here and we are still standing. We have our ancestors that we are standing on their shoulders. We have children that haven't even been conceived yet. And we are fighting for them because we want them to have a better life. But we're not just fighting for African people. As I just said, we want all people to be free of oppression, because a threat to injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Thank you, Dr. King. So this is how we understand that. And with that being said, the UNIA then fed into the Convention People's Party, the CPP. It fed into the PDG, right? It fed into Malcolm X's organization, the Organization of African American Unity, and so on and so forth. Malcolm X then fed into the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which contributed to the Black Panther Party, right? And that contributed to the Brown Berets. The American Indian movement has given nod to the Black Panthers many times. The Brown Berets have given nod to the Black Panther many times, saying that they took from them and borrowed from them in terms of their uniform development, in terms of them creating their points of unity, so on and so forth. And the Black Panthers have borrowed from the American Indian movement. They have borrowed from the Brown Berets. They have borrowed from the Black Berets. Like it's all a continuum, you all. That's what we've been saying. It is all a continuum. And so these organizations are all feeding into us today. They are all feeding into us today. And without them, we have nothing. So we need to continue fighting with them and for them, because we understand that this work is not done. It's not done by any means. It is not done by any means. We still have a responsibility to that. Now, how we choose to navigate that will be up to us. But if you are interested in joining the party, we would argue that that's the first step, is to join some organization that is working for justice. And we said some organization because it may not be the party, and we're okay with that. But we do encourage you to join some organization that's working for justice. And we also encourage you to increase your political education. And you could do that by joining the organization and creating a reading list. Just like I alluded to our reading list and the anti Zionist piece being on there, having pieces like that. You could even organize your reading list so you have different sections, a section on anti patriarchy, a section on anti ableism and homophobia, a section on anti Zionism, right? Why not? Right? And then just find these different readings that could be correlated into those sections, because we're going to have to increase our political education, you all. We don't know what we don't know. And when we don't know, that's harmful to our struggle and it's harmful to our progress. Ashe.
A- Ashe, obrigada, asante sana, medasi. Thank you very much. And we're just going to get right into the organizing work and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Shakur spoke of comrade Sister Ethel Minor, who, whose life is indicative of the topic today because she was a member of the Nation of Islam and she was heavily influenced by Malcolm X as one of the leading voices in the Nation of Islam in the early 1960s. And when Malcolm decided to leave the Nation of Islam and, as Shakur mentioned, start the Organization of Afro-American Unity in 1964, Ethel Minor left the nation with Malcolm and joined the OAAU. And then when Malcolm was assassinated the next year in 1965, Ethel Minor joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So this is just one of the many examples in which Malcolm's influence influenced the broader movement because, like was said earlier, Ethel Minor pinned SNCC's position on Zionism during the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, so-called Arab-Israeli War, and SNCC's position on Zionism, them being the first civil rights organization to come out against Zionism, their consciousness around this, along with that of Malcolm and the Nation of Islam, because they get that credit because they were talking about this. The nation was back in the time of the establishment of the state of Israel, 1948 in the 1940s. But that work, the consciousness around Zionism today in this country could never be where it is without all of that work. So this is again another example of Malcolm's influence. But as it relates to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, we have to understand the difference between organizing work and mobilizing work. SNCC was engaged in organizing work. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was engaged in mobilizing work. Dr. King was a great mobilizer, meaning he was great at creating the big events that were designed to give people an understanding of the problem, whether the problem in the early years was racial segregation, legalized racial segregation. In the later years of Dr. King's life, it became that as well as the Vietnam War. But his work was to bring people together to help them understand that these things are problems. That's the definition of mobilizing work. You all have done it. You go to marches for whatever the case, police terrorism. You march with people, you don't know them, they don't know you, you don't talk to them during the march, you don't ever even see them usually after the march. Because the objective of mobilizing work is to get you together to identify a problem. Great work. But organizing work is different in that whereas mobilization work is focused on identifying the problem, organizing work, especially revolutionary organizing work, is focused on the solution to the problem. And organizing work is not about including the media because you're not necessarily having big events. You may have some, but that's not the focus of organizing work. The focus of organizing work is to work with people every day to build their consciousness and their capacity so that they can wage the fight without you and they can get other people to help without you and they can build capacity that way and continue the struggle. That's organizing work. So that's the reason why mobilizing work, Dr. King would come in the city, do big events like the Edmund Pettus Bridge protest in Alabama in 1965, like the sit-ins against Sheriff Jim Clark and Bull Connor in those years, like the March on Washington in 1963, huge events, right? But SNCC's work was different. you can't name a single huge event that SNCC organized because they weren't doing mobilizing work. They were doing organizing work. Their work was organizing with the day-to-day people in the South every day. And that work was dangerous because you had racist elements working hand in hand with law enforcement, same thing, terrorists. And so you could not, it was not beneficial for these people to know who you were. And if you had huge events where people were speaking, that could easily be accomplished. So the work had to take place at night, in the dark, without people knowing. The day-to-day work, smuggling people into people's houses, smuggling them out of the houses, having them do the work. That's the kind of work that SNCC did. Very dangerous work. And because they did that work, they saw the raw terror that existed on a day-to-day basis when the cameras were not flowing, when the speeches were not being given. They saw the raw terror when they were searching for the three civil rights workers, SNCC workers and core workers in Mississippi, Philadelphia, Mississippi in 1964. Do you know that they found 9 other SNCC and core workers who had been disappeared? Because there were so many of these folks who were kidnapped, terrorized once they found out who they were. Very dangerous work. And it is the reason, it is because that work was so dangerous that it changed the perspective of the SNCC organizers. Whereas they had come into the movement based on the great work of Sister Ethel Minor, who was a board member for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, but had the great vision to understand that she didn't want the youth to have to be chained to the Southern ministers like Dr. King. She wanted them to have an independent organizing mechanism. So SNCC became that. But even so, SNCC in its early years, 1960, 61, 62, was certainly heavily influenced by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the ideas of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. You see that in their name. Their name was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That comes from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the leadership of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and the work of people like Bayard Rustin, who engineered the nonviolent civil disobedience movement. But because these SNCC workers were living under this terrorism every day, Dr. King was not. Dr. King would come in, give a speech, and then he would leave. I'm not saying Dr. King didn't. If you think that I'm saying, well, he didn't have to deal with danger, you don't know what you're talking about. You need to go back and look. We've done plenty of workshops talking about the courageousness and the dignity that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King had. That's not the point we're making right now. What we're saying is that the SNCC workers lived without notoriety. They were under constant danger. They saw the terrorism. They were in houses that the Ku Klux Klan and these other white terrorists burned down. They saw their comrades shot and killed. They saw even the white comrades shot and killed. There are a number of white people who were working in the civil rights movement, doing this organizing work, who were murdered in cold blood. Brother Daniels, who was a white young gentleman who was viciously attacked and murdered by white racists. They saw Africans like Sammy Young and all of these young Africans, Medgar Evers, obviously, and many more that you don't even know about who were murdered for standing up for our people. So they began to question this concept of nonviolence. They began to question it because the Africans who were in the South never believed in nonviolence. I'm talking about people like Miss Fannie Lou Hamer, who said, when was asked by the white reporter how her faith works to give her strength and guidance, said, I have a shotgun in every room of this shack. And if these crackers break in here, because they had broken in and set her place on fire many times and beat her and all that. So she said, if they break in, I pray to Jesus for straight aim. So most of the Africans in the South, and if your family comes from the Southern U.S. like mine does, you know, they always had guns. They never believed in nonviolence. People like Amzie Moore, who was a organizer with SNCC and was a sharecropper, was sitting there, had the SNCC workers in his house, and they were talking about nonviolence while he's cleaning his shotguns. And he had a gun everywhere and said, yeah, y'all keep believing in that nonviolence. Nonviolence will get you killed. So you got to understand this about the Southern Civil Rights Movement. You got to understand that. Over time, this day-to-day reality led SNCC to question the philosophy of nonviolence. and morality as a chief weapon to achieve forward progress. Kwame Ture said it. I'm looking at the poster right now. In order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience. The United States has none. This was because of his experiences seeing that in real time. That you try to argue morality with these people, they will slice your head off. And that's no different today in 2026 than it was in 1966. It's still the same thing. So, Malcolm X, because of this ongoing debate in the early years of it in 1961, SNCC wanted to invite Malcolm X to debate Bayard Rustin, who I mentioned was an advisor to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and was the architect of the nonviolence civil disobedience philosophy. Bayard Rustin, the man sitting in the chair on the left between Malcolm X and the moderator for the debate. And so it was SNCC that invited Malcolm to come to Howard University in 1961 and debate Bayard Rustin. And you can go on YouTube today. The debate is on there. You can listen to it yourself, even though it's almost 70 years ago. You can listen to it. And Malcolm destroyed Bayard Rustin. And the reason why he did is because Malcolm understood then what we understand now, that nonviolence should be viewed as a tactic, not as a principle. The mistake, the error that Bayard Rustin and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. made is that they saw nonviolence as a principle, meaning you can never compromise it. And so when you're dealing with people who have no morality, like we're dealing with today, and you try to have morality with people who don't have morality, you're going to lose that every single time because you have parameters on what you will do and what you don't do, because that's what having principles means. And you're dealing with people who don't give a damn what they do. Their only intention is to stop you any way they need to. And you have limits on what you'll do. You'll lose that confrontation every single time. That's why we have lost many of these confrontations, because people think that they can argue morality in 2026 with people who have no souls. And that's just not a good strategy. So Malcolm understood that then in 1961, and he argued accordingly, talking about people's first right to human existence is self-defense, to preserve themselves. And he argued that even lower level animals know that. You can corner the most docile animal. You can corner a cat, and you can be bigger and stronger and have weapons, and the cat has nothing except itself. You corner that cat in the corner, the cat's going to fight back. That's the nature of human existence, the first law of human existence. And Malcolm understood that. And Bayard Rustin, there was nothing he could say to challenge that, because it's absolutely right. So these contradictions began to fester. And as the SNCC organizers began to have these experiences in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and all the places where they were, Tennessee, where they were doing their work, the concept of what Malcolm was saying in this debate began to resonate more and more with the SNCC organizers. Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, talked about the SNCC, and that's on YouTube too if you want to see it. The SNCC organizers made cassette tapes of the debate, and they distributed them to all of the SNCC organizers, and they began to have discussions on this. And this began to be a element that changed the culture within SNCC. And so by 1962, 1963, under this influence coming from Malcolm X, SNCC organizers began to carry firearms. Even though they were in an organization called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, they began to carry firearms. It's estimated by SNCC members, many of them who are still alive and well, and those that aren't have written about it. If you do the research, there is as many as 85% of SNCC organizers were armed during those years in the South. You didn't learn that in Miss Snodgrass's. They all they told you was, we shall overcome, beat the hell out of me, and we shall overcome through the Spirit of Jesus. That's what they want you to believe, so that you don't know that you have the right to fight back for yourself. And you don't know that our people that fought for our rights fought back for us. This young African came to me the other day. He was in a military uniform, and he was like, "You don't," because I had on my shirt that says "African in America" with 3 Ks, and he's like, "You don't celebrate the 4th of July?" And I'm like, "No, I could never celebrate it." And he's like, "Too many people died for us to have the 4th of July." And I said, "Young African, no one, not a single person died for us to have anything in the War of Independence in this country." I'm like, I know that's what they've told you. I said, "But what rights are you talking about?" And he says, "Well, I can go to school." I'm like, "They didn't fight for that. You couldn't go to school. You couldn't go to school up until about 40 years ago." And that's 240 years ago with that nonsense you're talking about. And he's like, "Well, that's true." And I said, "So what happened 40 years ago? We had a civil rights." All right, so I pay homage to them. I don't pay any homage to anybody in the U.S. military. My father was sent overseas in the U.S. military. He told me don't pay any homage to that when I was a little kid. They're not fighting for you. They're fighting for U.S. imperialism. They're not. You have not. There's no rights that you have that Iraq or Iran or Afghanistan or Vietnam was fighting to break you. I mean, this is insane that in 2026 we still have to have this discussion. But it's an absolute fact. That's just not true at all. So this is the fight that we were engaged in, and Malcolm had a tremendous impact on the SNCC organizers in helping them radicalize their consciousness. And there were also meetings that were happening between Malcolm X and the SNCC organizers. After the debate in Washington, D.C., Kwame and some of the other SNCC organizers, when he was Stokely then, went to get some ice cream, and they ran into Malcolm X in the ice cream parlor, and they had a relationship, they had a conversation there, and they stayed in touch. This is why all of you know that Malcolm X spoke to SNCC in Selma, Alabama on February 12th, 1965, just a few days, 9 days before Malcolm was assassinated. He did that. All of us know that. That was even portrayed incorrectly in the movie Selma. The what's her name? Who did that movie? Ava DuVernay, whatever her name is. Um, that was portrayed incorrectly in that movie. In the movie, they portrayed it like Malcolm just came to the event and spoke. Like, oh, what event? If you're not a part of the program, you're just gonna take over the mic. I mean, that's not even. I mean, even to the dumbest person, that doesn't even make sense. Malcolm was invited by SNCC. The movie made it seem like the rally was a Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and they had the two brothers. What's that Negro doing here? Say in the movie. Look at the movie. Don't take my word for it. They said that when the Malcolm character drove up, the SNCC invited him. It had nothing to do with SCLC. It wasn't. Martin Luther King was in jail. That's why the SNCC organizers wanted to invite Malcolm, because they knew he could come there unobstructed. And he gave the speech. And then in the movie, they had this fictitious scene where the character playing Coretta Scott King came out and cussed out Malcolm on the street. And that never happened. Malcolm got there, went in there, spoke. Coretta Scott King didn't even get there to the event. She didn't even arrive until Malcolm was finishing his presentation. That's where he gave the famous house slave, field slave analogy. And when Malcolm finished speaking, he sat down. Coretta Scott was next to him. He leaned into her and said, "I'm just here to help." And he reached out to shake her hand. She grabbed his hand. She nodded. That is the only conversation Malcolm X ever had with Coretta Scott King. And she said that herself when she was interviewed on ABC News by Jackie Shearer in 1988. Look it up. All this stuff is available to you. I mean, there's no reason for us to be dumb about this stuff. And the reason why I say dumb is because we will disagree and not know what the hell we're talking about. We will disagree with people who have researched this history, and we don't know what the hell we're talking about. So we're just the messengers. We're just telling you all, that this is what happened. Okay. So understand that history. That's what happened. They established that relationship, and the influence of SNCC, of Malcolm X on SNCC, proliferated. And by 1966, that influence was consolidated. And that's why SNCC pushed the strategy to change the Southern Christian leadership slogan of freedom now to Black power. That was the direct result of the influence of El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Malcolm X. And on that dusty road in 1966, after James Meredith was shot down in June of 1966, exactly 60 years ago, because this is just July, they were marching down those roads in the so-called March Against Fear. Meanwhile, SNCC had a strategy. It wasn't just to make our people unafraid to exist in Mississippi and throughout the country. It was to elevate the movement to another level, inspired by what they had learned from Malcolm and other people with more radical views than the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. They had a strategy to go out ahead of the March Against Fear and work with the sharecroppers. And they had people, fearless people, who went out just by themselves in this Ku Klux Klan dominated Mississippi Delta and worked with our people around the Black Panthers Black Power slogan, telling our people that we need power. This is not just a power against racism. I'm sorry, it's not just a struggle against racism. It's a struggle for power. And the reason why we suffer from racism is because we don't have any power. So we need power. And so that's why when they had the camp out and the National Guard attacked them, they got up there and Mukasa Dada told, who was Willie Ricks then, told Kwame, say Black Power. And Kwame said, by his own admission, and I knew both of them, knew Kwame, spent time with him, still spend time with Brother Mukasa, who's still alive with us today and doing the work. Bless him and everything he does continuously. And Kwame is acknowledged when the years when he's on the Eye of the Prize series. He said, I didn't think the people were ready to hear Black Power, but Mukasa was pushing him, so he said it, and the people responded overwhelmingly, chanting into the night. The white man on the Eye of the Prize series said they were chanting Black Power. It was chilling. That's what the white man said on the Eye of the Prize series. This was a major transformation in the movement. And the point we're making with this program here today is it most likely would not have ever happened without the influence of El Hajj Malik El Shabazz on the civil rights movement in general and on the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in particular. And so we should talk about Malcolm's impact on the broader movement, SNCC and the broader movement. Now, a lot of you watch this TV show called The Godfather of Harlem with Forrest Whitaker. It's a good show. I've watched it. And in the season 3, they illustrate in the show that Malcolm and Bumpy Johnson, who was, a crime syndicate figure in Harlem for many years, for decades, were close friends. They weren't close friends in real life, but they did know each other. They did have a relationship in real life. But in the series, in season 3, they illustrate Ernesto Che Guevara, who at that time was a minister within the government of the Cuban Revolution. Of course, Che was born in Argentina, but he met Cubans when they were in prison for political activism in Mexico City in 1955. And he asked if he could become a part of what Fidel Castro was explaining to him they wanted to do to bring revolution to Cuba, and they accepted him. And he stayed in Cuba, fought in the Cuban Revolutionary War, and became a minister in the Cuban government before he left Cuba to go on and fulfill his dream of bringing revolution all throughout South America. But before that happened, Che was in New York to speak at the United Nations. He came to New York a number of times to speak there. He gave his famous 1, 2, 3 Vietnam speech, talking about the need to get the U.S. involved in multiple wars that would weaken the U.S. And the U.S. will call Che Guevara a terrorist, but they used his strategy in Afghanistan. They wanted to get the Soviet Union in a war they could not, they did not have capacity to win in Afghanistan, and that happened. That's why the Soviet Union was weakened from the 10-year war in Afghanistan and then fell and no longer exists today. But before that, Che Guevara was talking about doing that to the U.S. in his 1964 presentation to the United Nations. And while he was in New York, he met with Malcolm X secretly. They had meetings. They had a relationship since Fidel Castro came to Harlem in 1960 and was refused the Cuban delegation was refused the right to stay on the United Nations grounds, which although it's in New York, it's supposed to be international territory. But you know, these terrorists don't observe international law. International law to them is whatever they want to do. So they kicked the Cuban delegation out, and you know Malcolm and the Free Cuba Committee from Harlem, of course, being smarter than the European capitalists, and of course Fidel Castro and the people of the Cuban Revolution being smarter than the U.S. European capitalists, they invited the Cuban delegation, Malcolm and the Harlem Committee, to stay in Harlem, and they stayed in the Hotel Teresa, which was an African-owned Harlem. The building is still there today. You want to see it in Harlem, 125th Street. I've seen it many times. And so they had a relationship after that. And so Che and Malcolm met. And Che, the TV show had Che pushing Malcolm to become more militant. I don't know. I wasn't, you know, there's never been any documentation of what happened during those meetings, just like there wasn't any documentation of what happened in the meeting between Malcolm and Fidel Castro. But what we do know is that the effort behind the meeting, in some way, form, or fashion, was designed to bring about an alignment of African revolutionaries with the rest of the revolutionaries throughout the world, of which Che Guevara and Fidel Castro certainly were key figures in. And Malcolm was the key figure because he was from the belly of the beast. And of course, we had our revolutionary figures in Africa who Malcolm had met with, Kwame Nkrumah and Sekou Touré and Julius Nyerere and you know, of course, the folks who were there all throughout Africa. So this was the work that the CIA and the Mossad and all these terrorist intelligence agencies were working overtime to disrupt. But despite Malcolm being assassinated in 1965, his impact on SNCC in particular and our movement in general was apparent. A lot of the consciousness we have around the Cuban Revolution today comes from the work Malcolm and his Free Cuba Committee did in the 1960s. The ideas Malcolm articulated resonated more with the African masses than the ideas of nonviolence from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. You know that. You know that most of our people, you know how many people were denied the ability to do nonviolence work because they wouldn't do it. When they trained and they had the white people that the Africans didn't even know come in there and throw spaghetti on their head and spit on them, the Africans got up ready to fight. So they told them, you can't do this work. And I would have been one of them. I would have been excused. You can't do this work. But today, 61 years after Malcolm's physical transition, his ideas are as potent as ever. They're as potent. You can't, everywhere you turn, you see and hear the name Malcolm X. Everywhere you turn. And this is why the enemies of humanity are doing their best work to try to shape his image for you. And they've done it in these films like Selma. They've done it in these films like the night, Four Nights in Miami. And I know that African women did those films. I know the process. I love Regina King. I love Ava DuVernay, but they don't control those movies. And if you think that, you just don't know how this works. You don't know how capitalism works. They don't control that. They don't finance the movies. They don't pay for the movies out of their pocket. Spike Lee doesn't pay for the movies out of his pocket. They have to get the approval of the movie studios to release the product. And if the movie studio, whose chief responsibility is to advance the ideas of the capitalist system, don't like the criteria in the movie, don't like the curriculum rather in the movie, they're not going to release it. So that's why these movies slight Malcolm. If you don't know the history, you don't even notice it. It just subliminally enters your mind. Subliminally. We've talked a lot about it. You go back and watch the videos about it, but the point is clear that Malcolm's influence exists today. We all benefit from it. And the best way, he's not here anymore, the best way we can pay him back is to continue his work. And that's exactly what we're doing. So we thank you for joining us today. We invite you back next week to join us. Same time, same place, same platforms. We're going to be talking about who defines whether patriarchy exists, and also, can oppressed men be patriarchal? That's what we're going to talk about next week. So we invite you to join us. I know we'll get hate from that one, but we're here for it. Bring on the hate. We love that because that tells us that we're doing the work we need to be doing. The red and white QR code at the upper left-hand corner gives you APRP programs. You can go to the Forward Ever shop and order clothes that support our revolutionary work. So please do that. If you've done it already, order some more clothes and tell people about it. Give them the QR code so that they can do it. You spend money for all these birthdays and Miss Christ and all this other nonsense. So if you're going to do it, buy things that support the African Revolution. And every Thursday we have community self-defense. We have a new flyer. I didn't get a chance to put it up, but it'll be up next week. But anyway, come out on Thursdays if you're in the Sacramento area. 2775 Cottage Way, Unit 15, 2775 Cottage Way, Unit 15, Sacramento, California. Thursday, 6 to 8 p.m. They are disappearing our people. They are attacking our people. They're kidnapping our people. And your best safety plan is calling 911. You need your head examined. If that's your safety plan in 2026 and you're a marginalized people, you're an African, and your best security plan is calling the enemy to keep you safe, come learn how to keep yourself safe. So come on out. Thursdays, if you're in Northern California, if you're not, tell people that you know that are, and then they can show you what we're teaching them. Join the AAPRP, www.aaprp-intl.org. You can find out how to join, and the QR code in the bottom right, the black and white one, is for our work in Burkina Faso and Niger. We are collecting revolutionary literature in French because that's the language they speak there, so that we can have work study groups for the community, for the All African People's Revolutionary Party, for the African Revolution. So help us do that. Become a monthly sponsor. And then we ask you, the QR code at the top right is next to my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. It's only $8 paperback, 5 digital copy. Scan the QR code and you can get it. It's a great organizing book. There are dozens of what do you call them, reviews from people. I don't know the people, so they're telling you it's a good book. But more important than that, get some reading groups to read it. So order copies and call your bookstore in your city and have them order copies. It's only $8, so they can sell it for $12 or $15 and make plenty of money if that's what their objective is. In your library, same thing, have it in your library. The point being, 100% of the proceeds from my book go towards the work we're doing to keep our community safe. I just mentioned at the start of this program, we're going to be doing major work here in Sacramento, and we need money for that book. So I'm able to help because I have proceeds from selling these books. So help us help ourselves. Okay, so thank you for joining today. Come back, spread the word about this Our Ancestors Voices programs and all the work that we're doing. Stay strong, stay optimistic. We are winning. There's absolutely no question about that. Someone, before I came on here, I saw this post someone had made, they're attacking Africa. And I wrote, why is it always the people who say they don't want to have anything to do with Africa that are constantly attacking Africa? Leave Africa alone. If you want to have a fictional identity, have a fictional identity, but leave our mother alone. I'm not coming on here talking about your fictional identities. I don't give a damn if you want to live in Disneyland. That's your choice. We're trying to organize our people for freedom and forward progress, and Africa is at the center of that. So stay strong, forward ever, backwards never.